Good evening and welcome to this live broadcast from the Cockpit Theatre and Tete-a-Tete, the Opera Festival. My name's Bill Banks-Jones, Artistic Director of Tete-a-Tete, who programmed the festival, here with a couple of things to say before we watch The Agency by Sarah Siegel and Matthew Olyver. Their first two are related, really. They are that, of course, like everybody, we've had the most topsy-turvy year, and the artists in the festival have responded in the most fantastically creative ways to the rather painful situations we've been through. So we have been talking to each other week after week after week in huge groups, totally rethinking what we're going to do every other day, really. And so this show is a work in progress that is on a very different pathway to what the creators set out to do, and that's something to bear in mind as you watch it. I hope you enjoy it very much indeed. The second thing to say is that just as we work with the DCMS to open theatre with our pilot performance, we're now working with the Paul Hamlyn Foundation on the reopening of theatre, how everything can come back, and really appreciate your comments. You'll be sent an email after this and you must tell us what you thought of this broadcast. That would be really, really helpful. It's interactive in the sense that at the end of the movie, you're warmly invited and even encouraged to type questions into the chat, which I will then pass on to our panel who will join us after the movie. And the last and fourth thing I'll say before we start enjoying it is that we've kept the ticket price for this really low so that you can show your appreciation to the artists with enormous donations. And you'll see a link later and possibly even now in the chat, which is easydonate.org/agent. If you go there, in a couple of clicks, you can send our creators of this show a lot of money. They'll tell you at the end of the whole thing where that's going to go. Anyway, without further ado, let us watch The Agency.
I will tell you a curious tale, with stories of daring do and acts of fortitude. The country is coming upon strange times. The events narrated have all occurred, but if the incidents seem marvellous or improbable, remember the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Welcome to America. 1861. Welcome to America 2019. Sit down and listen to a genuine American tale from Alan Pinkerton, founder of the famous Pinkerton Detective Agency, once the largest private law enforcement in the world. The black art of detective work elevated to a gentleman's game, compelling thieves and blackguards to yield, serving the Union in her hour of need, when dark clouds of war gathered overhead. And I will share a yarn.
Of a woman.
Kate Warren, brilliant conversationalist, but she also understood that rarer quality in womankind, the art of being silent. the Jordan, a shining star at Pinkerton Incorporated, moving up the ranks, constantly at her desk, an ideal employee, with no life of her own.
I was always good with data, but got tired of Silicon Valley. After a while, everyone gets tired of Silicon Valley. And my husband got transferred to Chicago, so I moved with him to Chicago before our marriage broke down. And someone told me about Pinkerton Inc. That there was an opening for a risk analyst. The first woman of color to head up her division on the climate crisis. But I just look at the data. I just look at the data. To me, it's all data. And I make sure everything looks perfect. We stay vigilant so you can sleep at night. Defending the innocent against unforeseen forces.
So you can sleep at night. Defending the innocent against unforeseen forces, uncontrollable forces. "1861. Trouble is brewing, a nation divided. They're cutting telegraph wires, disrupting supply lines, turning houses on the Mason-Dixon into listening posts. We stand on the brink of war. But the Pinkertons out hand. Pinkertons are always at hand.
Mistress, a Mississippi femme fatale, the bells of the awakening Confederacy. until the all clear, our train pulling in to Washington, D.C.
"2019. Trouble is brewing. Planet is failing. Science tells us we don't have much time. We stand on the brink of collapse. But the Pinkertons are at hand. The Pinkertons are always at hand.
Now I'm taking care of the children he wanted, but I wasn't sure I wanted. Who wants to be a single working mother? And the Chicago winter try to be present. What I don't say to anyone is, it's a different world, a harder world, disaster prevention, and if not prevention, then disaster protection. But disasters are everywhere, and we've run out of time.
In the wilderness of America, of inept government, corrupt police, and wide open spaces, I have created a modern gentle detective, a gentle woman detective. Necessary knowledge is not just what to observe, but how and when. The United States is united no longer. As we tear at each other's throat, the black market flourishes. So, Pinkerton steps in.
Inept contractors, crooked suppliers, corrupt officials, making a quick buck off a distracted government.
And in the nation's capital,
The bars are full, the brothels are full, the gaming houses are full.
and the hospitals, yes, of course.
Even the army hospitals are full too.
Plus ça change. Where there's a war, there's a way. The United States is united no longer. As we tear at each other's throats, the president dismantles the country.
EPA regulations, relationships with allies, expertise of civil servants, replaced with nothing.
Across the world.
The floods last longer, the forest fires last longer, the droughts last longer.
And all the insurance.
Your insurance won't cover you.
You, my friend, should try to understand. A country run by neither rhyme nor reason, spinning out of control.
Pinkerton is law and order.
When there is no law and order.
Pinkerton provides security.
When the government is powerless. But just a minute. Wait, linger just a minute. There is something you must know. Pinkerton agent Timothy Webster, hidden in the Confederate bosom of Richmond, Virginia, has been discovered and arrested, condemned.
Betrayed by two fellow agents whose hands were forced by the rebs. Turned in by his own people. By Pinkertons. By Pinkerton.
A bad storm is coming, straight for the port of. There will be destruction and looting. We'll send in militias.
I collect more and more of this kind of data, and yet I can't do anything. Warn anyone. Prevent destruction. Because we profit from destruction. been sleeping badly. Maybe it's the divorce. My crazy hours at work. My husband, soon to be ex-husband. Says I'm neurotic, which is never sleep. That's
the Pinkerton motto.
We
Never sleep like a badge of honor. I fall asleep in the parlor, but I never wake up, or maybe I never fall asleep. A woman appears. Trousers? Shirt sleeves? Most familiar. Tells me Lincoln will be lost on the bus.
America will be lost.
We never sleep, not now, not these days. Pinkerton says we cannot save the world. We aren't in the business of saving the world. Agent Webster, too ill to send word. The first American hand since the Revolution. Could he have been saved? Have we done more harm than good? We are civilians meddling in war.
Pinkerton, the first company to hire female detectives, hire black detectives. The company of Lincoln's army. come home to my kids and wonder what kind of world I'm leaving for them. So I make a decision. Late at night, alone in my kitchen, I delete my mindfulness app and reply to the email.
Gosh, well, it's a really interesting experience watching that first this afternoon on my own, and then now in this group of a lot of people. I highly recommend any of you who bought a ticket can come back in the next 28 days to watch it again. I recommend that very highly. Also, tell your friends, and all of you, don't forget easydonate.org agent. Anyway, let's ask the creators of this show back in. So if you'd like to turn your videos on, we've got see who arrives. Here's Matthew Olyver, who's a composer, Emma Jude Harris, and Sarah Siegel, who wrote the words, and Emma, who's director, dramaturg. Anyway, I'll start off with a couple of questions. I mean, there's so much in that. I'll begin with you, Sarah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the truth behind this, who these women are? So we had such interesting conversations, what feels like 1,000 years ago, about who they are and where you got them.
So sometime last year, maybe spring of last year, I read an article in the New York Times called "Climate Change is Coming and the Pinkertons Are Ready," or something like that. And I didn't really know much about Pinkerton detectives apart from, like, I knew in Westerns they were always on trains busting up train robberies and stuff like that, and they were on Deadwood. And I read this article, and apparently they still exist, and they're a subsidiary of Securitas, and they profit from climate change, and I'm sure now more than ever. And the article is all about how they basically make a lot of money off of failing governments and collapsing social systems and hurricanes and forest fires and floods. But then the article did something really interesting, which is it sort of presented what Pinkerton is doing now, but it also dug into its history and said, actually, they started in a really interesting place because Alan Pinkerton was a Scot who came to the US in the 1840s, I think, and started Pinkerton in the 1850s when he kind of looked around and said, this is a lawless place and you need some law and order, and he provided it. And he was quite progressive, amazingly enough. He was a Chartist. He was an abolitionist. He had a stop on the Underground Railroad, and so Kate Warren, who was the Victorian Civil War era figure, was a real woman, and she was the first female detective in the country. She was working as a cleaner, and her husband had died, and she had to support her family, and she was living in Chicago, and thought, I could be a detective. They didn't advertise, obviously, in 1850s for a female detective, but she kind of marched into the office and said, I'm going to do this job. And I thought that was fascinating. And they also they were the first company to hire women, to hire people of color, because they knew that private detectives had to look like the general population. And so in that way, they were quite progressive, and they saved Lincoln's life. There was an assassination attempt on his life before his first inauguration. and they were spies during the Civil War, and they didn't do such a great job. It's kind of a question left up to history, but I was sort of thinking about the way these two sort of stories sit and how over time they actually became more of a corporate entity in their job, especially during the Industrial Revolution, and working for people like Andrew Carnegie and Vanderbilt. They were breaking up strikes. And it just was a really interesting story. And the main employee who they interviewed in the article, sort of at the end said, I know this is my job, but I also don't know what kind of future I'm leaving for my children, which, I mean, I started working on this last year, and it's only become more and more relevant.
There's so much in it. Just tell us before we move on a tiny bit more about the modern character, because she's equally fascinating.
So Leslie Jordan is purely fictional. Kate Warren is totally real. Leslie Jordan's purely fictional, but she was somewhat based on this person who works for Pinkerton, who was like, ooh, I have this job and I do this job well, but actually this isn't helping anybody, and actually it's probably hurting society. And I just thought, oh, how interesting. And what if she's like quite an anodyne sort of person who worked in Silicon Valley and is quite good with tech, and then she ends up getting transferred with her husband, her marriage breaks down, she's at a crisis point in her life, which kind of gets her to take action when she starts thinking about the effects that her own actions are taking. And I wanted to make her a woman of color because I think, I mean, this is a story about America, and this is a story about the Civil War and now, and there are so many interesting things about now and then, and oh, there's this company, they did all these amazing things for the Union Army, and oh, we won the war, and but really, what have we done for race and parity and equality, you know? So just the presence of two women on stage from different time periods, different ethnic backgrounds, provokes questions. I'm butchering my thinking behind this, but anyway, those are the two main characters.
Yeah, we've had lots of conversations about it, you and I, but also it's just extraordinary how much fact and thought and idea you've got into this piece. And then there comes the music, which was absolute galaxy of sound from you, Matthew. I'd love to hear both where the music came from, how the text impacted on you, and also how you delivered it, and even how the singers could hear what they were singing too. All of it I thought was fascinating and beautiful. But tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so firstly, where the music came from. So I've been working with Sarah for nearly over a year now on this project, and with Sarah's writing, it's got so much vivid description of character. That's the thing that sort of got me really hooked on it. So musically, I tried to capture these two very distinct characters, often with very different instruments, different orchestrations, often also different references to different periods of time as well. And then found a way to blend them together. So we have kind of the timeless sections have in the piece are kind of like a meeting of two musical worlds, if that makes sense. And the timelessness, also the big stretch of America, I really wanted to capture that. There's a lot of very spacious music, and my music, generally speaking, is quite spacious and has a lot of time to breathe in it. So I really wanted to capture that as well. As for how the music was actually made, I did it all in my bedroom, basically. I'm a multi. I play the viola. Viola is my main instrument. I also play the cello da spalla, which is like a massive viola and a small cello that you kind of play here. And yeah, that's really fun to play. And I have loads of different synthesizers, different pianos, different electric pianos. I even do some homemade percussion stuff, just anything I can get my hands on, really. Violin as well. And the singers, how we got what we did, the process for us is I recorded everything, what I call it the orchestra, you know, all the strings, the pianos, the electronics and everything by myself. And then I recorded the singers separately, but they had the orchestra in their ears as we were recording it, and then we lip synced the actual production. And it's quite an odd way of doing it. I mean, I think it's quite odd times, really, and I think that was the only way we could really get this to be how it was.
Yeah, well, that segues nicely into what I was going to ask Emma, which is where you set out to get and where you've ended up so far and what that whole pathway was like.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that Sarah and Matthew first told me about the project in maybe like November of last year. And then I was very interested and we were sort of talking about it. And then in terms of like moving forwards with it, it was sort of actually early March where we came to you and talked about doing it for tete-a-tete. And that was when we kind of had a deadline to work towards. And I think that was like 2 weeks before COVID. And I remember you and Sarah and I were like, oh, did we shake hands? Did we not? I mean, it feels like, literally a different century. Um, but basically, we had originally hoped for a 30 to 45-minute live work in progress. And I'd say at the very beginning of COVID, I was sort of playing with the idea of like a ghost orchestra, just speakers and a loop pedal, Matthew having done everything in advance, and then 3 singers on stage who could be socially distanced. But I'd say that the whole way through, even in that lovely month of like March to maybe early April, where we were actually considering the possibility of, a live performance being possible for us with people in the space, was very much thinking about ways to do it socially distanced and sort of, I'd say that the kind of minimalist aesthetic and, like the space between them, obviously thematically that makes sense and musically that makes sense, but we definitely had that in mind throughout the development. Like COVID was very present. I will say. So then it was like, oh, let's do this kind of live art, filmy, thing with it. And at some point, hopefully we will get to do a live sharing of the full opera and we'll get to do a production. But for now, yeah, this sort of different medium that none of us had really worked in before, at all, wound up feeling like the best way to put our ideas forward for the time being.
Well, you certainly put your ideas forward. Question from Tara Basildon in the audience. What was the idea behind the big electronic beeps? They seem very different to the rest of it. Is that a question for you, Matthew?
Yeah, so that was basically censorship. So there's certain facts and words they can't say because it's a bit like when you have redaction in official government reports, you get like a black thing over the thing that no one's allowed to know, like the government are committing some awful act. And yeah, Sarah, do you want to say a bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, we're playing with how this kind of modern world manifests a little bit differently to the world of the 1860s, and we were trying to avoid, because Pinkerton apparently is a little litigious. We're trying to avoid making things up about this powerful litigious company, and also I think what they do is bad enough. I don't think we need to make anything up. So Emma, actually, I was like, I'm struggling with, she was like, well, what are the things that they're doing now? I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, tellingly, I couldn't really find anything online. And Emma was like, well, why don't we have this little conceit where we have a redaction? And so we're kind of at the start of the journey of playing with that and figuring out how that can be woven into like the language of the show.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's because it puzzled me because nobody reacts to it, but now you explain it, I see why. One last question we've got time for, which is a bit extraordinary, from Elizabeth Dobson. Hello, Elizabeth, who's been with Tete right from the beginning. Was it always planned to use video, or was it conceived originally as a purely stage work? The video effects really enhance what was being said, presented. Well, congratulations for that. Emma, maybe tell us about that a bit.
Sure. So I would say that it was originally a stage work. And
So with
that was the
a
plan.
stage work with no video.
With no video. No, there was not a Katie Mitchell agenda originally. That sort of became necessary, and increasingly as we realized that was going to happen, that sort of fed back into what Sarah and Matt were doing. But no, it was meant to be a live opera for the stage, to be consumed by people in the space together and sung by singers live at that time. And then I think that we sort of wound up the piece evolved with video in mind, which helped. So it wasn't like a very abrupt shift in August. We were suddenly like, oh God. It was, I think, from spring onwards, we sort of had this plan of doing video. But as I've said, that's not our backgrounds or our medium. So it was sort of this like really exciting experiment of like, how can we not pretend? Basically, it was a question of like, if it's going to be a video, how do we, use that as opposed to fight it?
Yeah. Well, it's worth saying to our audience about everybody. I mean, it's hard to describe to everybody quite how much we all, as a huge group, all the artists in the festival, worked together all year. We were endlessly in Zooms together, endlessly rethinking pieces. And as I said at the beginning, that was quite painful, but also creative. And as you just said, all of us, I think, picked up things thanks to COVID that we might not have got otherwise. Anyway, we're hurtling to the pips here. But I was going to go back to Sarah just so you could say what any donations are going to go to. Sorry, to Emma, to say what donations go to.
Oh, good. Well, I would say that we've done this on a socially distanced shoestring, and I truly mean that. So all of our creatives were incredibly generous in that, they worked for fees that are much lower than, their incredible craft and time would necessarily merit. And we've all really kind of basically, I'm not great at the donation request, but basically we all worked far below our day rates, and have the three of us have put in some of our individual money as well at the end for materials. We had to stay in a travel lodge in Sudbury, which was an experience, but basically it just goes to topping up the ends of the costs to make sure that we can pay our amazing creatives, and making sure that the three of us, to put it quite bluntly, don't lose money.
Well, if you top up the costs, then hopefully that gets you further towards the finished product. Yeah. Just got 5 seconds each to say goodbye, so we better do that. So let's go in the order we started in. Sarah.
Thanks everybody for coming. It really means a lot. This kind of support is wonderful and really encouraging. If you have any feedback for us, feel free to get in touch. And thank you so much.
Matthew.
Thanks so much for coming. It's quite odd that it's gone from sort of my bedroom studio to here in the festival, and that's lovely. I love to share things, so thank you for coming. Thank you.
It's lovely to have had you. And Emma.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity, Bill, and thank you to everyone who's here. It's really nice to see the number of people who are watching, even if we're not in the space with you.
And a big thank you to Tete a Tete as well. Yeah. They've been really supportive, and it's wonderful to have this platform. They've worked really hard to really keep the flame going at such a terrible, difficult time for the arts.
And if you have, sorry. I was just going to say.
I was just going to say goodbye.
Oh, say goodbye. I was just saying, if you have any thoughts, we are still working and developing, so that would be much appreciated.
You're still there. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and plenty more for you to enjoy, so come and see some more. Okay, good night.